Move the horse into position, quickly!
All right. Welcome everyone to the third part of the TK Sivgin CM Kosemen Anatolian Deep History, Deepest Lore Spectacular series of videos. This is the third video, and without much ado, take it away, TK. Where were we the last time and what are we going to see now?
Well, last time we stopped here at this pond chamber of Shupiliuluma II,
Yep.
who also happened to be the last known king of the Hittite Empire. So this was a fitting ending. And in this part, we will get a bit more into detail about why the Hittite Empire and many of its neighbors ended. But before that, we will just dive a little bit into its contemporaries in Western Anatolia.
Yep.
So what we have here is what was first called the Azua League and later the Arzawa League, and this was a federation, or maybe it was a unified kingdom. We don't really know. This is a polity mostly known from Hittite letters.
Yep. Just for
Yep.
posterity, let me remind everyone that although this part of Anatolia is like Anatolia proper in the contemporary day, the Hittites were mostly a central Anatolian and eastern Anatolian empire.
Yeah, I have here is the map of the Hittite Empire, the new kingdom. Now we will focus on that western part labeled Arzawa, Luka, Achiawa.
Yep. And
those will get really important in the downfall of the Hittite Empire. So what these cities and city-states were, they were Luvian as far as we know. So related to the Hittites. And around 1400 BCE, they formed a league called the Azua League that allied with the Mycenaean Greeks and attempted to attack the Hittite Empire. But they were stopped by King Tudalia. And now what is bizarre, the exact same thing happened again almost a century later, around 1300 BC.
Yep.
Where this area, now called Arzawa, allied with the Mycenaean Greeks of Miletus and attempted another invasion of the Hittite Empire. And the reason was because at the time the empire was suffering from a plague it was a tularemia outbreak. Which to this day is actually called the Hittite plague.
What exactly does that disease do?
I think it is, if you look at pictures of it on Wikipedia, it's disgusting. It's a skin disease mostly. Yeah. So they tried to overthrow the Hittite Empire, but the king Mursili II, what he did is he got a bunch of goats and rams and had them infected with the disease on purpose, and then sent them to Arzawan cities so that they would get infected too.
So like biological warfare.
It is literally the oldest known instance of biological warfare, and it is actually what saved the Hittite Empire at the time, because Arzawa became too weak to carry on the invasion.
In the beginning of the stream we said no politics, but like sometimes you wonder with China.
Let's not get into that.
Yeah. Okay, yeah, definitely.
Yeah. But yeah, these guys are very interesting because they had a very close contact with what is called Achiawa, which is which we now believe was the Hittite word for the Achaeans,
all right,
or better known as the Greeks.
Yeah, there must be a persistent economic reason for this part of the land, basically, to not like the eastern part. Like, do we know? Maybe, I mean, did the Hittites tax these guys, or like, did they like demand tribute, or was there some other reason? What do you think?
I believe since the Old Kingdom, like if you remember, King Hattusili I already tried to conquer this area, but was stopped because Yamchat in Syria counterattacked him as a revenge for his earlier raids. So I guess they just were used to getting invaded by the Hittites, and which after Mursili II's attack succeeded, he basically broke up the Arzawa League and broke it up into 4 smaller vassal kingdoms.
Yeah.
Here, Mira, Hapala, Zeha, and very interestingly, Vilusa. Yeah, we will get to that later, but Vilusa is thought to be the Hittite word for Ilion, and Ilion is another word for Troy.
All right. Yeah. Now the whole story is, like, for me, it's kind of coming into focus a bit, because I mean, I knew about these parts of Anatolian history only in passing, so now it kind of clicks.
So really keep in mind Vilusa, and there in the south where Antalya is, Lucca. Lucca was not part of the Azua League, but it will get important, and it will become important later.
Yeah, there's a nice hotel in like the Antalya, basically archaeological park called Olympos, and the name of the hotel is Villa Lucca. So a lot of these names, like, sometimes touristic operators take a literal leaf out of archaeology or history books and use the names for an extra dash of originality.
Yeah, exactly. And yeah, Antalya is full with great hotels.
Yeah.
And another fun fact, it is possible that the word Asia actually comes from Azuva.
Yeah, might make sense.
Yeah. And now, since I mentioned them, the Greeks, the Achaeans, the Mycenaeans, who were those guys? These were basically the proto-Greeks of the Bronze Age. After their writing was deciphered, it was realized that they were speaking an early version of Greek. And you see, already around this time, they were establishing colonies in the eastern Aegean and on the Anatolian mainland.
Yep.
And that's how they came into contact and into conflict with the Hittites and with Arzawa.
I remember we spoke about basically people in Anatolia being still genetically linked to the very ancient states or polities that live there.
Yes.
Is there a similar situation with Greece? I mean, there must be, logically.
Yes, I mean, the study I showed in part 1, you can all read that online. They also looked at the relatedness of the Greeks.
So,
and they found similar results. Yes.
Yeah, it makes sense. Okay.
Yeah. Now the Mycenaeans, they spoke Greek, but culturally they were actually more similar to all of these Middle Eastern cultures we saw before. Similar to Egypt, similar to the Hittites, and also the earlier Minoans, which they conquered. They had what is called a palace economy.
The Minoans, by the way, were these famous people who had flushing toilets and amazing artwork and the bare-breasted snake goddesses, right?
Yes, here in Crete, look, I have to move my mouse all the way up here so it comes here, because in the last part I realized...
yeah, there's a bit of a mismatch.
Is it now pointing at Crete?
No, well, Crete is below. It's the big island, yeah. You need to go down.
Okay, that's the farthest I can go down.
Okay, well, anyways, everybody knows where Crete is. It's the long thing at the bottom, yeah. And a part of personal deepest lore, part of my father's family is from Crete, and I don't know. I always liked that place. Anyways.
So you're Sarpedon. We will come to that.
Maybe. I don't know.
Yeah. So the Mycenaeans, they took some elements from the Minoans, especially this palace culture, this palace economy.
All right.
Like many of these Bronze Age cities, city-states and kingdoms, they were actually very centralized.
Yep.
So everything about the nation's economy, the laws and the religion were handled by the king and his court.
Mm-hmm.
And so all the resources, all the economic output of the state was accumulated in the palace, where it was then distributed as the people saw fit.
So a bit like a bank, a granary, and like a palace all rolled into one.
Yes.
Probably also a justice house, and who knows, maybe even like a house of pleasures, if you know what I mean. Who knows? Yes.
And I just want to mention that because that will become important later for the Bronze Age collapse. So
okay.
And another thing that is interesting about the Mycenaeans is that these were the people that actually built the cyclopic masonry that the later Greeks write about. You see here the Lion Gate of Mycenae.
These are the stones that ancient aliens, people say, could not have been built by human hand because they fit so perfectly, but...
Exactly. So the later, after the Bronze Age collapse, many Greek city-states did not have the artisanal craftsmanship anymore to build these large stone block structures.
Yep.
So they wondered how they were built, and so their explanation was that these structures were built by cyclopes, so giant,
one-eyed giants.
One-eyes.
Well, I mean, it's like the OG ancient aliens thing. I mean, attributing an ancient ruin to a non-human race, basically. Like the name itself is like, I mean, come to think of it, that's very insightful and telling. So, I mean, there's just even the name Cyclopean kind of has an etymological link to the whole lore of ancient aliens. That's all I was gonna say.
Really? What do you mean?
I mean, imagine this, like they see these old stones and they call them Cyclopeans, maybe with the strange belief that actual Cyclopes built them. But in actuality, they were built by people, and much like the ancient alien theories, you know, it's just like a modern people seeing an ancient temple and saying aliens must have built this. So these guys look at these ancient temples and they say, well, whoever built this was probably not human. It's just an interesting riff, that's all.
Yeah, but what is the etymological link between Cyclopes and aliens?
Oh, no, not etymological, but
okay, I misunderstood you then.
Semantic, or like a philosophical affinity, let us just say.
Yes. Yeah, I get that now. Yeah, it's basically it is how you say it. It is, how do you say that in English? Like in German, you would say Blaupause. Like
a rhyme? I don't know.
No. Forget it. So now that we had Arisawa and the Greeks, who were the Trojans? Did they even exist? And yeah, for the longest time it was thought that Troy, the Trojans, the Trojan War, that was literally all completely fabricated.
Yeah, there are these themes to suggest that, you know, everything was probably a legend, but I think lots of stuff in history have truth behind them. I mean, this is also done for a number of like historical figures, or like, you know, religious founding figures like Muhammad, Jesus, Moses. I think for like each of those like great figures, there's been arguments made that they probably were not real. But come on, I mean, history shields itself, like history surrounds itself with legend, but the core kernel is real.
Yeah. For the record, it is actually consensus that there was a historical person at the core of Jesus of Nazareth.
Yeah. I mean,
and more obviously with Mohammed, because the Byzantines literally write about him while his armies were attacking their cities.
Yeah. Well, Moses is a bit of an iffy one, but I mean,
yeah, Moses, that's an entirely different. Moses would have lived around this time actually, but we have no evidence that he actually existed.
Well, I don't know. Anyways, that's a whole other can of worms. Let's move on to the Trojans now.
Yeah, the Trojans. So, of course, what famously Heinrich Schliemann discovered this site in Çanakkale. You see it there labeled as Troy.
Yep.
Which he identified with the mythical Troy.
Yep.
And surprisingly, over the years, more and more evidence has accumulated to say that yes, that this probably was the inspiration behind the mythical Troy. From the architecture, from the geographical location, and even from the dating of the sequences. The problem with Schliemann was that he was not really a professional archaeologist, and during his digs he destroyed a lot of contexts.
Yeah.
So basically the story is that he wanted to dig really deep to the deep layers where he found very large walls, like almost these, again, like Cyclopean architecture, which he thought fit the description of Troy from the Iliad. But the problem was that these walls later turned out to be way too old to have been the mythical Troy. So he destroyed the layer overlying that would have actually corresponded more with that time.
I see.
Yeah. So he destroyed some important information, unfortunately. Not all of it, thankfully, but yeah.
I've been meaning to ask, like, the Schliemann is also known to have discovered this thing called the Mask of Agamemnon, but do we really know it belonged to Agamemnon himself, or
no?
It's just the mask of a king, basically.
No, Agamemnon was a fictional figure.
Oh, okay.
Pretty much everyone in the Iliad almost everyone in the Iliad was probably a fictional person. Like, these were like the mythical clan founders for later Greek kingdoms.
Yep.
Similar to the biblical patriarchs. So yeah, it's probably impossible to link a single gold mask to someone like that. And yeah, back to Troy. The thing about Troy is that this place has been inhabited since 3000 BC and possibly all the way into Byzantine times. It was destroyed multiple times and recolonized multiple times. So you have so many layers to dig through, at least 9 layers, I believe.
It's kind of mind-boggling. I mean, in the Istanbul Archaeology Museum.
Here is a great illustration of that.
There's an exhibit like that in the Istanbul Archaeological Museum where they actually show you like a mock cross-section of all the layers, and it's city, soil, ash, city, ash, soil, city, ash, soil, like time and time again. It's just crazy, and it's just really like almost Lovecraftian that like cities keep dying and keep getting reincarnated that way. And I think it's just in some ways very comforting too, that these things keep coming and going, and for some reason people keep living there. There are streets, but they're not your streets. That's very like poetic and science fictional almost.
Yes. Yeah, you can find these millennia cities in almost every country.
Yeah, except for the US. Imagine there were like 10 layers to New York. How cool would that be?
Yeah. That's the tragic history of North America, that shortly before Columbus arrived, there were actually these thriving Copper Age civilizations already developing there. And if they had a few more centuries time, they would have probably developed into proper large empires and kingdoms.
Ah, true.
Yeah. And by that I mean North America, like north of Mexico, because in Mexico itself you of course had the Aztecs.
Yep.
And then further south in South America you had the Incas, which were proper large civilizations that were in some aspects more advanced than their European counterparts.
Yeah, true.
Yeah,
and
but we're derailing a bit. But yeah, what did you want to say?
No, that's just like the closest we will get to an alien contact. But yeah, let's not even go there now because gotta keep on track.
Exactly. So it is. So Troy Layer 7, which was built around 1300 to 1180 BCE.
Yep.
Is thought to correspond closest in time and architecture and culture with with Homer's Troy.
Oh, all right.
Yeah. And the interesting thing about Troy Layer 7 is that in one of its sub-layers was found an artifact with Anatolian hieroglyphs, which remember, are these things.
Yeah, the
records the Luvian language.
Yep.
And of course, it's just a single artifact. It's I think the only piece of writing that survives in Troy.
Do we know what it says?
I don't know, actually. The problem is, thanks to World War II, many of these Trojan artifacts are now, unfortunately, in a museum in Moscow.
Ah, okay. And we all know how that story went. All right.
Yeah. So, like, of course, in like the 1800s, 1900s, Troy was being excavated by German teams. Then World War II happened. Germany was raided by Russia.
Yeah.
So I don't know what happened to these artifacts.
And who is this handsome Trojan you have on this picture here?
Read the description. That's not a Trojan.
Yeah. I know. It's interesting you refer to yourself as Yörük, but like, did you I did not know you had this background to yourself.
That's my father's family.
Just for posterity to our readers, would you want to tell a little about the Yörük people?
They're like the Bavarians of Turkey.
Oh, all right. Yeah, like one of the constituent peoples of Turkey, known for being really based and like, also like for being like strong and fit, and so.
My mother's side, by the way, comes from. Oh, I don't have the map right now. Comes from the Black Sea region.
Okay, so you're like a proper Anatolian mix. Not a weird hybrid like myself. Like I come from the descendants of Sephardic Jews and some people from Crete and some other people from near present-day Salonika and like some others from Isparta, which is like close to the Western Anatolian centers we just saw. Anyways,
Sparta?
everybody's a mix in Turkey.
Not Sparta?
Not Sparta. No, that.
No,
everybody makes that mix, but no. Everybody makes that mistake, but no.
So in your free time, you don't walk around half naked with a shield?
Well, no. I don't think I would, even if I had a Spartan background. I don't know.
Oh God, I completely forgot what I wanted to say. Right, the Anatolian hieroglyphics.
Yeah.
What this suggests, if we can take this as evidence, it would suggest that the Trojans were actually Luvian people and not quasi-Greeks as they were depicted in the Iliad.
Yeah, I mean, it would make sense. So I don't think Eric Bana was one of them, if that's what you're saying. But like, no, it would make sense for people in that region to like mix back and forth with like people from the other side of the Aegean, basically.
Yeah, I mean, there are already like Mycenaean influences in the in the Trojan architecture. So, yeah. But what it would suggest is that what this artifact would suggest is that they, at least on some level, these are Luvian-speaking people.
Yeah, I mean, if they probably traded with them. So once again, like, I mean, trade works both ways. So I don't know, even if they were like as Greek as you could get in that part of Anatolia, they would still be trading with the Luwian speaking people. So, you know, there would be some documents. So yeah.
Yeah. Like you said before, like you say, you're not a full Turk because of your mixed ancestry. But if this entire series so far has shown anything, is that Anatolia has been anything but homogeneous.
Yeah. That's like one of the takeaways. I strongly agree. And I mean, come to think of it, it's not like an enormous landscape. You know, we're not talking about like Siberians versus West Europeans here. And it was a part of the world in which people always moved around and people always traded. And I don't know how mobile people were in those ages, but there were probably lots of people who traveled like back and forth between different centers, even if they were just like dedicated traders and such. So yeah, I think like it's
especially,
kind of like
especially in the Aegean, I thought it was very normal to travel between islands probably every day, every week. Everything was so close, and
you didn't even need a compass to navigate. You just could navigate by shore side, basically. At least during the warm months. In winter, nobody sailed. Like even until like quite recently. Like in the winter, you just stayed wherever you were.
Nice and cozy.
Yes.
You wanna see some of my holiday pictures from Troy?
Yes, please.
First, here's the archaeological map. You see all the layers on top of each other.
Yeah. So the oldest ones are blue, and they get red and yellow as we get more recent. Or is that the other way around?
Other way around. Like Troy 1 is the oldest, Troy 9 is the youngest. You see, like Troy. You see here. So Troy 1 to 7 are these Bronze Age cultures. Troy 7 is probably Luwian, and then Troy 7 is destroyed and then replaced by Troy 8, which is a Greek polis.
Yeah, and it's got grid streets and everything.
Exactly. So that is like a recolonization.
Yeah.
And Troy 9 is a Roman city.
Yeah, and I noticed in that sign you just saw in the next slide that basically they have amphitheaters and they all come from the latest layers. So
exactly.
It's like saying, here's a Walmart.
Yeah. So for people wondering where Troy is today in Turkey, right next to Çanakkale.
Yep.
So here, this is Troy 2, built around 2500 BC. To orient yourself where we are in time when this was built. This was around the same time as the Great Pyramid of Khufu was being built in Giza.
So quite old, actually, huh?
Yeah. You don't really see, I guess you see it here better, but this was a massive structure, really megalithic.
I mean, I only saw this thing in pictures because, I mean, guilty as charged, I never traveled to see the ruins of Troy. It seems so modern, I think, but it's just from the way they cleaned and like restored it, I guess. But it must be like much more enormous to see it in person.
Yeah, you're right. There could be some restoration attempt here, but yeah, it is gigantic. If you actually see it in person, it's very impressive. And to think that this was made by people that barely left the Stone Age is just amazing to think about.
Are one of those slabs you see on that big ramp, like is one of that like is one of those slabs as big as a car or something like?
I guess you can tell it a bit from here. They're not that big, but the ramp itself is just really big.
Oh, okay.
Could fit almost 2 cars could fit on there side by side.
All right. I see it now. I can scale it in my head now.
Yeah, I'm very tiny, you know. No. This is, I believe, Troy 6, so slightly older than the late Bronze Age Troy.
Whenever I see pictures like this, I want to flip the stones to look for snakes and lizards and scorpions, but yeah, I guess this is not the place to do it.
Yeah, this is... Some archaeologists would look funny at you if you did that, probably.
Yeah.
And so this is, I believe, Troy 9, so this is the Roman layer.
Whoa. Impressive.
This is Troy 8, so these are made by Greeks, these structures.
Yeah. I read in Marek's book, in The Land of a Thousand Gods, about the gradual process in which Anatolia was made a part of the Roman Empire. And it's just like, I mean, in the contemporary day and age, everybody kind of like bundles ancient Greece and Rome together, but in Anatolia, they actually had a couple of wars against each other.
Oh yeah, the Pontic Wars, you mean?
Yeah. And the Persians also stepped in, and like it was like a big old shit fight.
Yeah, the Iron Age, that will be its own video.
Okay.
At the end of this, it will just make it past the end of the Bronze Age.
Alright.
We already talked about it a bit. So the Trojan War, what was that about? Now, it's important to remember the events that the Iliad describe would have realistically happened around 1200 BC. But Homer himself, he was writing around 800 BC. So he wrote about things that happened 400 years before he was born. And between that time, there were no written records in Greece anymore. So everything was
dark.
Not dark, but everything was transmitted orally. The Iliad, like Homer probably wasn't the author of the Iliad. He was just the first one to write it down. But it had probably existed long before that as a song.
I see.
Yeah. So it is important to keep that in mind when thinking about the Trojan War, because a lot of the things he talks about are probably very confused memories of a much earlier time.
This reminds me of this one movie called, I don't know if any of our viewers remember this, but there was this like weird dragon film called The Reign of Fire. And basically in this movie, the dragons like rule the earth. Don't ask me how. And people are in some sort of a dark age, trying to barely survive. And like one of the little details in that film is that, you know, when everybody's kind of huddled up and trying to like cling on to life, basically, the adults do a little theater act to the kids to entertain them, and the thing they act out is Darth Vader fighting Luke Skywalker. So it becomes like their legend, even though it has no basis in reality. It was just an interesting note, and I'm sure like a lot of lines between reality, memories, and legends, and just plain old fiction must have been blurred in those times and ages.
Yeah, you're totally right. But the interesting thing is that as more we find out about Troy and the Hittites and all those Luvian states, the more we find some sort of core to the entire story. Because remember, Troy 7 was destroyed around, what date did I write down? 1180. And there's a strong sign that it was destroyed by an invasion. Because a lot of the buildings were...
as I told a bit a few more slides ago, it's just like, I mean, history does accumulate like a coating of legend, but the kernels are based on truth. They're right there.
Yeah, except that we don't really know who destroyed it. Maybe it was Greeks, but maybe it could have been somebody completely different.
Oh yeah, okay. That's the point. Yeah, but still.
Yeah. Then the interesting thing is the city that existed before Troy 7, Troy 6, was evidently destroyed by an earthquake. And
as it would happen, yes.
Yeah, and the interesting thing is that in Greek mythology, earthquakes are caused by the horses of Poseidon. And
right, so
you can kind of imagine how the myth of the Trojan horse could have come about. As this
okay. So, all right, now I'm having an epiphany.
Yeah, as this great horse of Poseidon, and also a wooden horse may have been originally a metaphor for a warship.
I mean, anything is possible at like that level of time haze, basically, but it's certainly an interesting angle to consider.
Yes. Yeah, or maybe the Trojan horse was like a giant siege engine. Remember, like Grunt from Lord of the Rings.
Yeah.
Like, we know that the Assyrians around this time had these giant siege rams that were often modeled after animals.
Yeah, there were like lots of like during the period immediately after Alexander's downfall. Somebody, I think it was in Rhodos, they had this kind of siege engine called the Helepolis, which was like the city taker, and it was like this big ass mobile war tower, like almost like a mecha, like in one of those animes. So yeah. I mean, I would, out of all the hypotheses we discussed, I would place money on the siege engine theory.
Yeah.
More than
I would place my money either on the warship or the earthquake. If there really was the core. The whole story could have really just been made up, because it does seem kind of like a fairy tale, the way they tricked the Trojans.
Yeah, I mean, nobody's gonna not check a giant horse left on a doorstep of the city.
I mean, there is actually an episode in the story where, like, one of the Trojan priests, Laocoon, he wants to check because he knows that this is extremely suspicious that the Greeks would leave such a gift behind.
Yeah.
But he gets eaten by a giant sea serpent as punishment. Because
how dare you doubt the rules of hospitality or some sort of stuff.
Basically.
And you can't piss on hospitality. I won't allow it.
Yeah, the gods just don't want him to find out.
Yeah, I mean, this is really like a cautionary tale, right?
Yeah.
You can't be too safe.
Yeah, I mean, they're literally, in German, they're literally saying, einem geschenkten Gaul schaut man nicht ins Maul, which means a gifted horse, you don't look in the mouth.
Oh yeah. You have the thing in English language too. You don't look a gift horse in the mouth. But I think it has a different meaning. It means like if someone gives you a gift, don't check it for imperfections, or like don't be too much of a perfectionist or something like that.
I mean, it has the same meaning in German, but it's just a funny analogy.
Yeah, don't check a gift city horse for a bunch of armed men hiding inside.
Anyway, another interesting thing about the historical Troy is that we have a lot of clay tablets, a lot of clay letters from the Hittite kingdom, where they sent these letters to leaders in Greece and in Arzawa, where they like detail a lot of the political situations at the time, and they show that there were a lot of shifting alliances and conflicts between Troy, Arzawa, and Achiawa.
Yeah.
This pretty well reflects the situation in the Iliad, where the Greeks start fighting amongst each other during the siege, and the Trojans are in trouble with their allies, and it's complete chaos.
Yeah, these things are always a mess. Like when there's like more than two political entities in a small area and like some natural boundaries and stuff, like it's always a never-ending struggle. I mean, and it's never quite resolved.
Yeah, wait, let me say this. Another interesting thing about these letters is that they mention King Alexander of Troy. And in the Iliad, Alexander is another name for Paris. Was the Prince of Troy.
All right.
That's the strongest evidence we have that this person from the Iliad was based on an actual person. And then there's also some etymological links. For example, the name of King Priamus may have been based on the Luwian primua, which means most courageous or extraordinarily courageous
leader, or maybe who knows.
Yeah, so just some intriguing things. And yeah, from one mythical people we come to another. Were the Amazons ever real? No, but they may have been based off real cultural practices that the Greeks observed in Anatolia and maybe also misinterpreted. Now, the interesting thing about the Amazons is, like, later Greek and Roman writers always associate them with the Scythians, who were people in the Eurasian steppes in Central Asia, in where today is Ukraine. But in the oldest Greek sources, it is stated that the Amazons actually lived in Themyscira, which is today in Terme, so northern Anatolia.
Yeah, just for context to our listeners, especially American listeners, this is like a distant and isolated part of Anatolia. So it's like, how should I say? It's like comparing, well, it's a bit like comparing New Jersey to the shores of Lake Michigan or something like that. I mean, quite far away lands. And there's a tendency to like lump in all these they're all like, so like there's a tendency for some people to lump in the Amazons with the Trojans and stuff like that, but they actually lived in a quite distinct part of and then inaccessible part of the land. So yeah.
Yes. And yeah, there is actually, like, Herodotus actually gives us an explanation for how this shift happened from Anatolia to the steppes. And he tells that at one point there was a large Greek fleet of slave owners. They raided Themyscira and took many Amazons as slaves. Then they sailed to some Black Sea colony, maybe in Crimea. And there the Amazons overwhelmed their masters and freed themselves. And then they rebuilt their society in the northern Black Sea and intermingled with the Scythians.
I mean, who knows? Yeah. With the Amazons, I'm not really sure. But
like, listen to me.
Yeah.
I don't think this is a real story. This was an attempt at, like, look, when Anatolia was still wild country for the Greeks, they peopled it a lot with mythical people.
Yep.
And as more and more of Anatolia was discovered, they didn't find the Amazons. And so the myth simply geographically shifted. And you can see this pattern a lot in ancient history. For example, before Alexander's conquest, there were a lot of stories about headless humans and one-footed humans living in India. And after Alexander actually went to India and he didn't find these people, the myth simply shifted over to what the Greeks perceived as China.
Okay.
So this is basically a mythical geographical shift, and this story by Herodotus was probably invented to explain why there are no Amazons anymore in Anatolia, why they are further off, closer now to the edge of the world.
Well, tell me one thing though, like, how did this name get to be applied to that big ass jungle in South America?
I believe it was Yeah, because the first European explorers in the Amazon rainforest, they encountered the local people there and observed that the women there also participated in hunts and maybe even like tribal warfare, and so they called them Amazons.
And they had a lot of weird legends about that part of the world too, like the famous city of El Dorado, giant snakes and stuff. So it's
City
like
of Z, yeah.
City of Zinj, isn't that in Congo?
No, Z.
Oh, I don't know about
The
that.
lost city of Z by this. I don't remember the explorer's name, but the guy that went to the Amazon to look for his city and he never came back.
He must have found it.
There's even a movie about it, I think, with Robert Pattinson.
Is that the same? Because there is a movie after a book by Michael Crichton.
No, that's fiction. The one with the gorillas, right?
Yeah, that was a nice movie, actually.
Yeah, that was about the mines of Solomon. That's fictional.
We have to do a Lost Cities special one day.
Oh,
yeah.
God, like where to even begin?
Yeah, lots of stuff to cover. Just saying.
Yeah, like the lost city of Ohio.
Wait, that's like a real name, and okay, we'll get there when we get there.
Ohio is mythical. Like, if you ever meet someone and they say they are from Ohio, run away. They are not human.
Okay, it's that urban legend. Okay, yeah. You have similar legends about, like, you got a similar urban legend in Turkey, and it's called like the province of Bayburt doesn't exist, and anybody who says they're from there is actually lying, stuff like that. I don't know. I always kind of like dislike these urban legends, or like dislike even these memes, because they kind of throw shades on rural parts of the country. Whereas, like, I actually been to the outskirts of Ohio, and it's a nice place. That's all I'll say about the matter.
Yeah. Dear viewers, if any of you are from Ohio and you are indeed human, please say so in the comments.
Also, if you listen this far, please say I believe in lost cities, so the algorithm knows where we are, and like we also know how many people watched so far so long.
Yeah. Also, just as a reminder, check out Memo's Patreon.
Yep. Yes, donations, please. All these podcasts don't get made for free. We both take time off our day jobs and other chores to do that. So, a little support is always appreciated.
Yes. So, yeah, what may have been the historical core of the Amazons? We know that at least one Anatolian people, the Lycians, actually were matrilinear. Which means that they took the names of their mothers.
Yep.
So the mothers were like in family lineages, the mothers were more important than the fathers. And then there are some hypotheses by some older German archaeologists that the Hittites maybe also had an egalitarian society. And I don't think there has ever been any proof for it, but also no proof against it, that the Hittites also had women in their army.
No, I don't know about that.
I mean, if you look at this mural of the siege of Dapur here, like those people wearing yellow, those are meant to be Hittites.
Yep.
And they do look a bit more feminine than the Egyptians, but I think that's good. That could just as well be the art style.
Yeah, I mean, once again, you never really, I don't know, too much evidence to say anything conclusively. Yeah,
we don't have many records about army compositions of the Hittites. So this is like if you're writing like a historical fiction novel, like you can interpret anything you want in there. I just wouldn't go too wild. And
Yep. Anyways.
Yeah, and if you remember the first episode, some of the older Anatolian cultures, like the Hattians, and maybe these Neolithic people from Çatalhöyük and Haçilar.
Yep.
They maybe even were matriarchal, but that's hypothesis solely based off their reference to female deities.
Once again, I don't know.
Yeah.
I mean, if you look at contemporary Anatolia, there's sort of like a inverse within inverse situation with the battle of sexes. And if you go to like deep heartlands of Anatolia, you would see that the people there are very conservative. Women are mostly like expected to stay at home, although the trend is changing a bit. But if you look within that, actually, like even when they're like stuck at home, women get to call the shots, and like the traditional Anatolian mother figure is like a very heavy-handed character who has like absolute domination over her sons, daughters, and husbands. So it's like I don't know. I mean, depends on how you look at what power within society means. Like if it means calling the shots, like who's gonna do what, then in the deepest, most conservative parts of Anatolia, women actually have like an extremely advantageous position of power, but they kind of like hide themselves behind these conservative mores, and it's really distinct from the other like truly patriarchal forms of like male hegemony you see in places like Syria and Arabian countries and stuff like that. So
I mean,
there's just a caveat.
I can directly relate this to my family. I'm scared of telling a bit too much, but my grandmother in Dennisley,
Yep.
bless her, she's doing well, thankfully.
Nice.
She's basically the godmother of the whole village, and by that I don't mean in a religious sense, but in a, let's say, more mafia sense.
Yeah. So that's the exact kind of thing I'm talking about. Like, so women don't work as like lawyers or like, in some places they have certain dress codes they're expected to conform to, but in terms of like raw power, I mean, they really are OP. I mean, that's all I'm gonna say.
Yes.
And another side note, by the way, also the figure of the strong woman, it seems to have had this, like, as you wrote in that very last point, for Greek culture, it seems to have had this like misogynistic fascination. And you also have things like the famous play of Lysistrata, where like women act up and refuse to sleep with their husbands until they stop the silly war or something. So it is kind of like a trope in ancient Greek culture to have like women who kind of like flip the tables on men, really. And maybe that's a mark of exoticism, or maybe that's like a reflection of reality. I guess we'll never truly know.
Yeah. I mean, you already took my point away. Like, what I wanted to say is, even if these, let's say, matriarchal practices were as mild as what the Lycians did, this would have still left an exotic impact on the Greeks, who basically gave no rights to their women.
Yeah. I mean, yeah.
Like for them, the idea of even like taking the surname of your mother would have been the height of exoticism.
Yeah,
And
I mean,
in Greek mythology, that it is said that the Lycians are actually descendants of the Amazons.
Ooh.
Yes. Speaking of which, did you want to say something? Like
no. Let's move on. I was just another tangent point, but this map is so badass. It looks like a fantasy map, and when I look at this map, I see this not in the size of Antalya province, but I see this like basically the size of Earth, really,
Yes. I mean, the geography of Anatolia, it's a universe unto itself.
Exactly. And imagine this was a whole planet like this. Like, I don't know how it would be to live here, but anyways.
The Turk planet.
No, just Lycia. Like this thing, but
yeah, no, I'm imagining like Star Trek aliens, but they're Turkish.
Oh, all right.
Sakın bana yaklaşmaya kalkmayın. Bana erişemezsiniz. Ben bir taneyim. Gerekirse sayılamayacak kadar çoğalırım. Buradayım. Her yerdeyim.
Like a Turkish Klingons or God.
I don't know. The thing with Turkish people are they're extremely adaptable. Like you see in contemporary society, I guess even we are kind of an evidence of that. Like, I mean, people like Cenk Uygur or Hasan Abi, like Turks make great Americans, if you know what I mean. So they're a very adaptable group of people. They're very canny, and even though in some aspect, in comparison to, let's say, quote unquote, more developed countries, they do come across as like a little graceless. They have their priorities straight, and I don't know. I mean,
yes,
of course, then you got these memes of like this guy stepping out of a car covered with Turkish flags, and he's also covered with Turkish flags, and those are crazy.
Yeah. But let's get right back on topic. Who were the
Yes.
Lycians? These were another people that spoke Luvic dialect.
Yeah.
So this was another part of this grand Indo-European subfamily
Yeah.
of Anatolian languages.
Yep.
And Lycia was always an independent kingdom. It wasn't part of this Arzawa League, and
Yep.
it was also never directly part of the Hittite Empire.
Yeah. And let me interject here and about this map too. Like, if you like this map, please type "I like this map." But also, like, foreign viewers have to realize this map is not showing the scale of heights a lot. So basically, what you're looking at here is not like a land with lots of plains and stuff, but no, literally straight from the sea in this part of Turkey, in this part of Anatolia, straight from the sea. You have these gigantic mountains come out like shark's teeth out of the water. And like
it shows better on this other map. Not as well.
like you can't really understand without being there. Like there's barely any seashore, and it's just mountains like rising out like rockets and like trot out of the sea. And when you climb on the highlands, there's actually a second and tertiary layers of mountains going all the way up. So this whole area is like one gigantic castle of like kilometers high mountains jutting straight out from the sea. And it's just like a fascinating, like almost like Tolkien-esque part of the world.
Do you think that inspired the Lycian tombs? Like, I forgot to add a picture of that, but some of these like native Lycian kings had mausoleums that were like these really tall tower-like structures.
Yep. Well, what I know about those structures is that they probably replicate some older structures made out of wood. And in some villages in the highlands of Lycia, actually, you have people building wooden granaries in a very similar style. So I think there's like some sort of connection there. Also, by the way, if anybody watched the 2022 movie Dune, you would notice that what was the family name of the good guys?
Atreides?
Yeah, so the Atreides tombs in the seaside, they're like exactly copy-pasted from Lycian tombs.
Yeah. Don't they also have this bull iconography?
Yeah,
like
they
this,
do.
Like
they
these
do.
Hattian and Hittite cultures. Yeah.
Or maybe Knossos, Mycenaean. I don't know. But like the tombs of the Atreides family, they're like straight out of Lycia. I mean, the designers didn't even change them much, but it's just awesome. And like when I saw that in the movie, like I felt so proud.
Yeah. So should I carry on?
Yep, please.
So yeah, it is in like Lycian is let's say a native Anatolian language, which is a bit juxtaposed to where the Lycians allegedly came from in Greek mythology, because there they actually came from Crete under King Sarpedon. But according to the myth, they, like Sarpedon and his followers, they intermingled with the Milesians, who also spoke an Anatolian language. So maybe that's why they now spoke this kind of language.
I mean,
yeah,
anything is possible. But let's go on. Yep.
Yeah. So the Lycians, they figure a lot actually in Greek mythology. They were, for example, allies of Troy. And they were also well known to the Hittites, and at some point even allied with them.
Yeah.
What I forgot to mention about the Battle of Kadesh last time is that the Hittites basically pulled vassal forces from all over Anatolia. They had a whole list of their allies. If you watched 300 and you see this scene where Xerxes basically brings out the troops from everywhere in his empire. So you have like these almost Zulu warrior looking guys. You have war rhinos, war elephants.
People with goat skulls, yeah.
Yeah, basically. I think it was...
monsters from the deepest darkness of Asia. Yeah.
Exactly, yeah. Like the Hittites did something similar. You can, in their records, they say that at Kadesh fought Trojans, they fought Arzawans, and they also fought Lycians.
Against Egyptians.
Exactly. Which becomes interesting later because the Lycians are mentioned in Egyptian records as the Luca. And the Luca were one of these iconic sea people to which we will get later. We don't have to elaborate on that yet. So yeah, you can imagine this independent kingdom sitting here but would one day become Antalya, and at some point I believe they became basically pirate lords.
Yeah, because these shores are so suited to piracy, and even until Roman times or even later, I think this was like a pirate's hideout basically, and they just like lurked on these shores and pounced on passing ships that were crossing between, let's say, mainland Greece and Egypt, basically.
Exactly. Hello, everyone. We're back after what the cyberpunk kids of today would call a biological break.
Yeah.
We want to talk a bit about King Sarpedon of Lycia.
Yep.
Because he's generally an interesting figure. So in most versions of the myth, he is a son of Zeus and the brother of King Minos.
Yep.
You may know as the father of the Minotaur.
True.
Yeah. So they were both born in Crete.
Yep. So that's the Cretan connection, I think.
Exactly. There are also some versions of the myth where he is instead, I think, the grandson of Bellerophon.
Yep.
Who you maybe remember from the second episode as the Slayer of the Chimera.
Yeah, Slayer of the Chimera.
Yeah, but in most versions he's the brother of Minos. And now the story goes, at least one version of the story, like there's multiple versions. Minos and Sarpedon were both in love with a young man named Miletus.
So they both fancy the twink.
Exactly.
Miletus
reciprocated that love with Sarpedon, but not with Minos. So Minos got so jealous that he expelled both of them from Crete.
All right.
Sarpedon would go on to found Lycia, and Miletus would go on to found Milet.
Yep, which is another nearby city.
Yeah. Yes, on the western coast. And it is an interesting story because, again, this might be some like mythification of a real event where two or more Mycenaean or maybe even Minoan rulers came over to Anatolia to found their own colonies.
Yep.
And their own kingdoms that were then later assimilated by the local people. Because, as mentioned, Lycian is actually more closely related to the native Anatolian languages. Although they didn't write in this Luvian script, but instead in their own alphabet that similar to the Greek alphabet, was derived from Phoenician signs. You can see that here in the picture.
Yep. Well, actually, I only know, all I know about Sarpedon is that it's a very, very cool name. And other than that, unfortunately, I don't know much about his name and legend, basically.
Yeah, Sarpedon would later go on to be an ally of the Trojans during the Trojan War.
Yep.
And he would stand out because he was a very... he did it for the glory mostly, but he was a very skilled fighter and a very ethical one.
Yep.
And at one point he even scolds Hector for having to do all the work in defending against the Greeks.
So like an all-around based hero figure, right?
Yes. Like at one point I think he said at one point he goes up against Patroclus, who is the best friend / lover of Achilles.
Yep.
And he says, if I manage to kill Patroclus, I will live on in glory. If he manages to kill me, he may live in glory.
Nah, okay,
Yeah.
okay.
And as it comes, he is slain by Patroclus, but then Patroclus himself is slain by Hector, and that sets off the entire ending
Chain
of
of
the Iliad.
events. Yeah. What
Yeah.
are you sipping on, my friend?
Nothing.
Oh, okay. I thought that was like a tea sip sound. Well, I am sipping on some delicious linden tea here.
Linden tea.
Yeah.
Yeah, my lips are a bit dry. I think it's that.
You gotta get your bio break on.
Exactly. So, and yeah, before we get to the big crash, also a short note on these mountain tribes that also lived around Anatolia in
Yeah,
this
once
time.
again, like for our mostly American viewers, this is like the other end of the landmass. So where we just looked at the whole Lycian Peninsula, that was like a world unto itself, it's like much more to the west and south of this part. Basically, you have to cross a subcontinent to get to this sea, which is actually the Black Sea. So if you were to cross the sea, you would reach present day Ukraine or something. That's just like a geographical context. And so at that time, this was like basically wild land, huh? How did that go?
Yes. I mean, you see Hattusa there, so that's the capital of the Hittite Empire.
Yep.
And so the whole left lowland, you see that was the Hittite Empire, and these mountains that surrounded it were all beset by enemy tribes, and the most notorious of these were the Kaskians, who lived there right in the north in the Pontic Mountains.
Mm-hmm.
And they are a bit of a mysterious people because they didn't leave behind any writing. And
do you think they were like wiped out? Oh yeah, they were wiped out. Yeah,
but not by the Hittites. That they were. So basically, these people were the bane of the Hittites. And throughout the history of the empire, they managed to burn down Hattusa multiple times.
Mm-hmm.
And at the very end, when the Hittite Empire collapsed, they did it one final time, and then just occupied the city. So all this Hittite heartland was for a time actually occupied. It was occupied by the Kaskians, but because every dog has its day, and then the next day they don't, because they were then later completely wiped out by the Assyrians.
Oh well, at least they had some limelight in history.
Who were these people? There is an interesting suggestion made by one linguist that these were actually Hattians that had gone unconquered by the Hittites.
Oh,
so you can imagine these as these native Anatolian people leading a sort of guerrilla war against the empire.
Yeah, I mean, once again, like in that part of Anatolia, the northeastern part, there are just so many valleys and like distinct zones that like you travel 20 miles and you come to like a literally different land almost. And it's like difficult to convey without actually being there. So, I mean, heaven knows how many other like previous strange tribes and cultures lived there even before these people. And it's just like a never-ending source of mystery. Do we know anything about the Kaskian language, by the way, or?
Yeah, like I said, from the few names and maybe words that we know, that there have been some links to the Hattian language.
Oh, okay.
Which has led to this hypothesis that these were actually the one and the same as the Hattians.
Yeah.
Yeah, so, and right next to this, you see Pala. They spoke Palaic, which was an Anatolian Indo-European language.
Oh.
And they did leave behind some writing, but all we really know about them is that they were wiped out by the Kaskians.
Interesting to note that in contemporary Turkish, the word pala means machete, but I think it's just a coincidence.
I think so, because that type of weapon wasn't really invented yet. I mean, well, in Egypt you had the chepesh, which was a sword that kind of looked like a machete.
Yeah, but yeah, it's just a coincidence.
Yeah. And yeah, now really interesting, just to the east, you have these people called Hayasa Azi. And a strong case can be made that these maybe were the ancestors of the Armenians. Because
very interesting.
Yeah, because the Armenians today call their country Hayastan.
Yeah. This is like a slightly more to the west and north of where a lot of Anatolian Armenians would call their heartland, but still, yeah, I mean, who knows? Stranger things have happened.
Yeah.
There was also a case made for the Urartu being the ancestral Armenians.
Yeah, Urartu, that we will get to that in the next episode. Urartu was actually a Hurrian kingdom that was gradually being populated by Armenian people.
Yeah, I mean, the version I know is that they were basically the Hattis. So Urartus were to Armenians what the Hatti were to the Hittites. So
yes,
something like that.
That's a good comparison. Yeah. On the note of the Armenian language, it's not related to this Anatolian. It is an Indo-European language, but it's not related to these Anatolian families. It's actually closer to Phrygian or even Greek. Ooh. So it is possible that these people actually came from the Balkans and migrated all the way along these Pontic mountains until they ended up there.
I always thought Armenian language was actually related to Iranian, and like there's even the sounds today are quite alike.
I mean, that's in part because Armenia for a long time was part of the Persian Empire.
Oh. Well, I don't know. Like, I read a bit on this matter, but I mean, I'll concede to your information. But from what I know, Armenian pretty much nestles in the Iranian language tree. But so you're saying like the people are different, though? Who knows? Who knows?
I mean, it is one hypothesis that it is more closely related to Greek.
Once again, like, I am not as good a linguist as I would like to be to comment on the matter.
Yeah. And yeah, at last there is also Ishua, which was just this Hurrian vassal kingdom.
Oh, and we don't know anything about them, basically.
Yeah, basically.
Well, once again, like, you really need to travel in these parts of Anatolia. And like, don't even get me started on the parts that are like to the east of this map. It gets even crazier there with like taller mountains and stuff. Just fantastic stuff.
And of course, these like one-footed and headless people.
I don't know. Yeah, you
The
might say that.
Skiapotes. So now we come to the bitter, bitter end. Around 1200 BC, literally everything just goes to shit. And
it ends tonight.
Yeah. So you see here, Mycenaean Greece, literally every palace that existed in that area burned down to the ground.
Whoa. Okay.
Yeah. In the eastern Aegean, Troy is burned down, Milet is burned down, all of these Arzawan cities burned down. The Hittite Empire completely collapses almost overnight.
Oh shit.
All these Levantine smaller kingdoms made up of like Syrians and Canaanites.
Yes, they did not fare well, as we can read on the map.
Yeah, they were raided, absolutely raided and decimated.
So
Egypt
like,
and
it's a worse fate than fatality, or like, I mean, was this not the final destination of the? Anyways, but no, you go on with the exposition.
Yeah. So Egypt and the Syrian kingdom, they survived, but they lost a lot of their internal and external power.
Mm-hmm.
So, yeah, what do you think happened? Aliens?
I would maybe say a super volcano or like a long-term famine, but who knows?
I mean, you're thinking of the Minoan eruption, but that happened actually 500 years before this.
Yeah. So not that.
Yeah.
I'm maybe thinking like the systems they built had reached their limit, but who knows?
Yeah, like we will get into that actually. So have been many hypotheses over the years, and I believe all of them are true to some degree. And probably also interlinked to some degree. So obviously there was this idea that there was this big invasion of the sea people. We will come to that. Then warfare itself changed a lot with the invention of iron and horseback riding.
War never changes.
Yeah. And like you said, the agriculture of all these civilizations may have overextended. At the same time, there were climatic changes and natural disasters that probably led to famines.
Yep.
And there was probably also a complete global breakdown of all these trading systems.
Yeah, which is like a warning sign for the present day.
Yeah. And of course then, as always, there were also civil wars and other domestic struggles. Or, like I say here, maybe it was just the 10 plagues of Moses, who knows?
Oh, well, I mean, out of all of these, judging from what we see elsewhere in history, and I'm thinking about like what the Europeans did to Mesoamerica, basically. Warfare and iron seems like the most logical choice, because all of these things happened so fast, right? It's just like the collapse of the Mayan Empire or the Incas. Like somebody came and just like went through their ranks, unfortunately, and maybe it was a technological inevitability. Who knows?
Maybe. So the most classic hypothesis is that there was this mass migration of people, similar to what you will later find in late antiquity, where both maybe people like the Dorians or the Phrygians came from the Balkan down into Greece and Anatolia, and so the Dorians who were another Greek ethnicity distinct from the Mycenaeans. It's still being debated if this invasion ever happened, but let's say it did. It's possible that they came down and burned down all of these Mycenaean city-states.
Yep.
At the same time, the Phrygians came down from the Balkans into Anatolia and burned down all the cities there. And then you can almost see a timeline. First, the cities in the west get destroyed, and then there is this wave of destruction that goes further east.
Yep. I mean,
first Mycenae is destroyed around 1200, then Troy around 1180, or maybe a bit earlier, and then
somebody was on a killing spree, that's for certain.
Yeah, so and then around 1170s there's this big invasion in Egypt. So what the general hypothesis is that these basically these new invaders destroyed the previous Aegean world, all these Mycenaean and Arsawan city-states, and the refugees from that destruction then went further east to Cyprus, to Ugarit, to the Levant. There they destroyed even more, and then there were even more refugees, and then they all came down into Egypt. And there, for a second, and there, around 1175 BC, there was actually a great battle that has been recorded, where all of these sea people, all of these displaced people, came down onto Egypt and wanted to conquer it. And he, like the Chad he's generally regarded as the last great pharaoh. He actually defeated them.
This reminds me of the Japanese repulsion of the Mongol invaders, in almost in a way.
Yeah. Although their natural disaster helped.
Yeah, a typhoon helped, but that's fascinating. So the Sardinians were one of these sea people, and I've been to Sardinia, and they had these like strange fortress-like structures. I don't know, a bizarre land. But let's not get derailed, because this is just like so fascinating. And everybody listening so far, please comment. Why do you think this happened? Let's discuss it together. It's always better talking about these fantastic disasters with friends and viewers.
Exactly. Another reason for why these migrations may have happened is climate change. And here is a quote from Herodotus' Histories, which may shed some light on what may have happened around this time. Do you want to read it?
Yes. Well, in the days of Attis, the son of Manes, there was a great scarcity throughout the whole land of Lydia. So the king determined to divide the nation in half, the one to stay and the other to leave the land. So he was doing a Thanos thing. The emigrants should have his son Thyrenus for their leader. They went down to Smyrna and built themselves ships. And after sailing past many countries, they came to Umbria and called themselves Tyrrhenians. So, it sounds like a national origin myth, and I think the key focus here is half of the people leaving to set out another city, and the scarcity seems like a bit of legend just thrown in there for good measure later on. But
there's two things. There is actual archaeological evidence that there was a climate change happening around this time, and that Anatolia was getting more arid.
Yep.
That's the first point. The second point is this partition of Lydia is actually very similar to the partition of the Hittite kingdom at this time, because there was, like I told you, there was a northern dynasty and a southern dynasty.
Yeah.
And the Greeks, like I told you, they didn't know anymore about the Hittites. So maybe the Lydia that Herodotus here talks about is actually the Hittite Empire.
Yeah, I mean, I won't deny that, climate change and scarcity, they probably did happen, but all I'm saying is the things you described happened so fast that, maybe it was the culmination of a long period of climate change, and who knows, certainly these climactic patterns really leave their mark on history years later. But I think the science, if you will, of decoding that is still in its infant stages. If you get what I'm saying.
But another thing is, of course, this pattern of like Aegean refugees settling down in what would later become Italy.
Yep.
And that's, like you said, that's a founding myth that is not just found in the Tyrrhenians, but for example also the Romans. Because if you remember the story of Aeneas, he was a prince of Troy, and he took the last survivors of Troy on his own odyssey throughout the Mediterranean until he ended up in Latium, so central Italy, and became an ancestor to Romulus and Remus.
Well, I mean, once again, like, to me, after everything we've seen, it seems like this thing was happening, and then in that desperation, the invention of iron kind of picked up pace. I mean, maybe it would have remained a kind of parochial technology if this atmosphere of conflict hadn't made it advantageous for people to like make iron shit and like fight other people with it. But yeah, I mean, like, my guess is as good as yours. I don't want to be presumptuous, but it seems like the greatest catalyst was like the invention of iron weapons, basically.
I mean, there is not much evidence that iron was used in a grand scale around this time yet.
Oh, okay. Then in that case, my hypothesis falls flat. But anyways, it's just cool to talk about these things in general.
Now we can talk about the individual sea people. They are named in Egyptian sources and also some of the last Hittite sources, and also some Levantine scriptures. And there have been attempts to assign some of these names to real people. So there are the Denian, that's what they were called in Egypt, and Achiawa and Ekwesh. It's generally thought that these were the Mycenaean Greeks.
Yep.
Then the Luca we already came across. Then there were also the Libu, which, I mean, you can guess by the name, those were probably Libyan tribesmen.
True.
Coming from the Sahara Desert. They were attacking Egypt around the same time as the sea people. And now with the Shekelesh and Sherden and Teresh, it becomes a bit more...
they have the coolest names, by the way, those three.
Shekelesh could be meaning Sicilia, Sherden could be Sardinia, Teresh could be the Tyrrhenians, remember this?
Yeah.
Sheker, maybe those were Trojans, and Weshesh, maybe they were Arzawans. But it is interesting that there's like 3 groups possibly that came from all the way in the Western Mediterranean. And there is solid evidence that these were actually from there, because as you can see here, the Sherden, so these possibly Sardinian people.
Oh, yeah.
In the way the Egyptians depicted them, it is very close to artwork found by the Nuragic culture in Sardinia around this time.
Yeah, I'm actually a huge fan of the Nuragic culture, and I got several books about their bronze statues, and they really have this like horned head thing taken up to the max. And in some of their statues, the warriors seem to have like 4 eyes and 4 ears, if you can believe it.
Man, that must suck to sleep if you have 4 ears, because then you hear everything.
No, sorry, 4 eyes and 4 arms. My apologies. Yeah.
Okay, 4 ears.
No. Like I don't know. I just had a
so the
brain aneurysm moment. Yeah.
The Sherden were actually known to the Egyptians for a long time. Already around the time of Ramesses II, they had tried to attack Egypt, but they were defeated by Ramesses. And then they became mercenaries for Egypt.
Okay.
But now the interesting question is, did these people come originally from the Western Mediterranean around Italy? Or did they originally come from the Aegean and then settled in the Western Mediterranean, like this story tells us? And we don't really know.
Yeah, that's
either way.
Interesting. Another thing about events like this is that they must also be somehow linked to a population explosion. rather than drought. Like, so I don't know, like one generation before this somewhere, who knows?
Maybe, or displacement, you don't know.
Yeah.
At the same time, there was we already mentioned the Libyans, but there was another desert people expanding around this time, the Arameans. And these were Semitic people from the Syrian desert, and around this time they basically did what the Arabs would do millennia later.
Yep.
They just overran the whole place. And they found
I really wonder if there were like any forgotten charismatic leaders in all these waves, like, because I mean in these cases you always have like there's a similar situation with the mass migration of like people into Central Europe after the fall of the Roman Empire, for example, and it's a time of heroes, it's a time of prophets, it's a time of legendary people, and I really wonder, like, I'm certain all of these like interesting people whose names we saw in the previous slide, they all must have had like some heroes or legends or like some even like religious leaders that we just don't know about, because basically they kind of extinguished their push, if you know what I mean.
That you mentioned something very important. I forgot. I completely looked them over. The Pele set you see here.
Yep.
It is now generally accepted that these were actually the Philistines that are prominently featured in the Bible.
Yeah, and this name I believe is related to the Palestinian people today, right? Or
it is it has the same etymology, but the Palestinians obviously are not descendants of the Philistines.
Okay.
There is strong, there is genetic evidence from the skeletons and also some cultural evidence from their pottery that the Philistines actually originated from Crete. So these were originally Aegean people.
Ooh, okay.
And the records from Ramesses, the pharaoh you see here, is that after he defeated the sea people, he relocated the defeated Peleset in southern Canaan. That set the stage for all the stories in the Bible. With David versus Goliath and such.
It's interesting to note that in contemporary Turkish language, basically the name for contemporary Palestinian people, Filistinliler, is the same as the Philistines in this classical sources that we are now discussing.
Yes, so, the etymology is the same actually, yes.
Yeah. But I guess this is not like, it's just a correlation and not a direct link.
But let's go back to the Arameans.
Yeah.
Like I said, they have a heyday around this time. They because they were nomadic herders, so they were not dependent on civilization as it was known at the time.
Yep.
And so they expand into these, at this time many cities become abandoned and agricultural fields become overgrown with wild weeds, so this became a paradise for herders.
Yep.
With the domestic animals. So they have a great time, and they were also renowned warriors, and the Assyrians and sometimes even the Egyptians actually hired them as mercenaries. And that's how they sort of spread across this whole fertile crescent area. And that would, for later history, have a tremendous influence, because Aramean over time became the dominant language of the region until Alexander's conquest.
Oh, yeah.
So, and this is reflected in the Achaemenid Empire, the Persian Empire, which actually used Aramean as an official government language. Many of their court documents were actually written in Aramean. And Jesus himself is often described as an Aramean. And he may have actually, if he was a real person, which I think he was, he may have actually talked in Aramean during day-to-day conversations.
Well, I guess it sounds plausible. It's just an area I don't know much about, but it sounds very plausible, yes.
Yeah. And also Arameans, they're still a very important minority in southeastern Turkey.
Yeah, and that I know. Around Mardin and surrounding areas.
Yeah. So we have now at least one important minority that still lives in Turkey established here.
Yep, one of many.
Exactly.
How are the Syriac people related to Arameans, by the way? Do you know?
No, that is a bit outside of my expertise.
So in contemporary Turkey, in that region around Mardin, basically the chief minority are they're a majority in that region now, the Kurdish people. Then the chief minority are the Syriacs, which are a Christian people actually, who speak a form of Arabic related language. And then you have the Aramean people who are like rarest of the rare, and there are like some other like rare groups too. But yeah, that's all I know about this whole thing.
Yeah, I mean they probably are all related in some way.
Yeah.
So this is the last slide actually, which.
Oh no, we reached the end of the
Yeah.
amazing. So it's been 2 hours almost.
The end of the Bronze Age, and
yeah.
Now, something that is rarely talked about, which is that all of these empires were also going through some enormous internal struggles around this time.
Yep.
And remember, like all these cities I mentioned that were destroyed, not all of them were completely destroyed. In some, like Hattusa, only administrative buildings were burned down.
Oh.
So like the palace and maybe court buildings, and of course you can interpret a lot of things from that.
It just sounds based, to be honest.
Yes. So maybe that was just the result of a civil war, like a counter king tries to wipe out the enemy royal family.
Yep.
Or maybe people were just sick of their god kings and rose up against them. And burned down everything.
This is one of my like long-running themes, basically, in all my podcasts and ramblings about history, is that there comes a point in which people actively grow sick. Like basically societies are all very complicated tools, and they have expiry dates. They have expiration dates. And many people, for example, really lament the loss of the Roman Empire. But it's clear to see that, like, at some point, many people were like actively growing sick of the institutions and like the overall burden of supporting the society. So they like piece by piece cast it away and changed it. And I don't know, maybe it was such a date of expiry for these societies too, which only goes to show that our society might be running a similar risk. Who knows?
Yeah, you're already taking away all of my talking points, Memo.
Oh, okay. Like, consider this a preamble then.
Yes. So at the same time, we know that the Mycenaeans were the Mycenaeans were never a unified people. They were always minor city-states that were constantly at war with each other. So I believe some Greek sources directly state that they wiped themselves out through these wars.
Yep.
Yes. And yeah, around the same time, the melting of iron disrupted a lot of trade routes, because before that, for bronze, you needed tin. And to get tin, you needed trade routes to very remote places like Iran or even the British Isles. And now that everyone knows how to melt iron, metallurgy became democratized in a way, because iron is the most common metal on Earth. So you didn't need these long trade routes anymore to keep up with tool manufacturing. And are you still there?
Yeah, no, I'm just thinking it's just one side of the collapse, but then still there would be not much need to, well, basically agriculture would still have been an important industry to prop up these societies. So
we will come to that.
Okay.
So, yeah, the trade routes, they become disrupted.
Mm-hmm.
The trade routes become disrupted and the palaces are burned down. And now this is an important point I mentioned earlier. Back then, civilization, as they knew it, mainly existed to prop up all of these royal houses.
Yeah.
Now that you have these royal houses, either they don't work for the people anymore, or they have been annihilated by other people or by their own people. The economy is breaking down. So this entire palace economy that existed before, where the kings accumulated all of the excesses from metallurgy, from agriculture, from craftsmanship in their palaces, and then redistributed it to society, that completely breaks down, and basically people find no point anymore to living in civilization, because like if you had the choice between living in a city that is starving and is constantly under enemy attack and just living in the mountains as a goat herder, what would you choose?
And bring out the goats.
Exactly.
Yeah.
So basically people just maybe collectively gave up on civilization. It was just not viewed as necessary anymore like later cultures would do.
Oh yeah. I wonder what the goat herding alternative is going to be for our upcoming wave of collapse. Or who knows? I mean,
goats always work. We don't need to replace it. We can just bring back goats.
Yeah. Contemporary societies might be like terribly more resilient too, unfortunately.
Yeah.
Anyways, it's a whole other point. We'll probably need to do another whole podcast about it.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And now, if you want, you can read this Warhammer-esque quote from the Ipuwer papyrus down there.
Wow, indeed, the river has turned to blood, yet the people drink from it. Behold, things have happened which have not long happened.
Have long not happened.
That long not happened. The king has been overthrown by the rabble. It sounds like somebody in Britain talking about the French Revolution, to be honest.
Yeah, you're not far off. This is from the Ipuwer papyrus, which is an Egyptian papyrus thought to date to exactly this time.
Yep.
And yeah, you can get a good sensibility of what may have been happening around this time.
Yeah, a lot of carnage,
yes,
to say the least. Yeah.
So, and with that, I think my closing words are states, civilization, economics. These are all things that we originally created to make our lives easier. Yeah. But now, if politicians, if the economy do not work anymore to make our lives easier, then what's the point to keeping them around?
Yeah, preach it, brother. I mean,
those are my closing words.
Yeah. Doesn't leave much more for me to say, except that, as the great American philosopher George Lucas once said, it's like poetry, it rhymes. And I don't know, I'm a bit tentative to make big claims, but our generation may be just unlucky enough to be caught in just such a rhyme about to drop. And heck, even since the time you and I started making these podcasts together, I mean, the way chaos has been normalized in everyday state of affairs is just like extremely worrying. I mean, every day I turn on the radio and they have it like cheerful morning music, and they talk about like 2 global wars which risk upending the world. Like it's just bizarre, and it's like something. If somebody was like suddenly zapped to the present day from 5 years ago, they would not have believed it, you know. So that's like a very, very grim state of affairs. All I've got to say maybe as a counterpoint, a hopeful counterpoint, is that in some ways technology may make our societies more resilient, at least for another few more decades. But in that time, I think everybody is better off like reevaluating the life goals they had during, which were established during an unfeasible age of plenty in the 1990s, 80s, and even before. And life, fortunately, is like a big generative adventure and like with lots of room for change. So I think like a common message for anybody listening to this podcast, especially if you're one of the younger people, is that like it's clear to see great changes are coming, but fear not, because as long as you like reevaluate certain core assumptions about life, you may have an easier time adapting at the great and inevitable wave that is to come. That's all I'll say for now.
What I will say is maybe look into getting some goats.
Yeah, maybe. No, like everybody's conditioned to like live better off than their parents, but it's clearly not gonna happen. Like even if you like internalize that, you're like better off than I think 80% of the people out there.
Well said. I wonder if our time in the future will be called something like the bizarre collapse, because the general feeling I get is like society and civilization around us is breaking down, but we still have to go to work.
Yeah, like business as usual. I mean, maybe it was like that too back in the day. I mean, like, imagine some of the coping mechanisms these palace people must have developed until the people came for them, basically. And fortunately, in our day and age, like you and I are not the people who the masses are gonna come for. And I don't know.
You don't know enough about me. Maybe they will.
Well, it depends.
You don't know what secrets I hold.
Well, I mean, well, if you have any secrets, then I could at least say I have some powerful friends. That's all.
Are we gonna start a war here?
No, not you and me.
But come on, it would be fun.
No, come on.
Yeah. So that was a long tangent about the downfall of civilization, and the next episode we will look how the world rebounded again in the Iron Age. And
yeah, there's always hope. Always hope. This is like the Studio Ghibli aftermath of the great big dark grim disaster, basically.
The Valley of Nausicaa.
Yeah. Oh, that's so nice.
And yes, look forward to this, because there will be just as many fascinating cultures and historical episodes to look forward to, and probably even much more material to talk about, because now literacy becomes much more prevalent. We will talk about Lydians, about Phrygians, Galatians, Pergamon, Alexander the Great, the Persians, Romans.
Yep. Well, I mean, on a closing note, I also want to thank you for like literally doing God's work. I mean, something like this probably doesn't exist on YouTube, at least certainly not in this resolution and like at this level of detail. So, like, thank you for your service, I guess. This has been a great show, and like, I'm very, very happy to be part of it.
I have to thank you for participating in this.
Yeah.
And also
always ready to help a fellow Anatolian.
Yeah, and also for providing all of these anecdotes and general wisdom.
Yeah, thanks. It's just an oldish guy grumbling about the few things he knows, but thank you.
So, goodbye, everybody.
Yeah, looks like this has been it. Thanks for staying with us for so long, and once again, consider supporting both of us on Patreon. So at least TK and I get to stave off the bizarre repetition of the Bronze Age collapse for a bit longer. Every penny helps. And that's that from me.
Yeah. Goodbye.
Goodbye. Goodbye. Ciao.